It was the summer of 1994 in Edmond, Oklahoma, and the days felt endless. The heat clung to the air like a thick blanket, but for Lorraine, it was the perfect time to be outside with her best friend, Cindy. Lorraine, 12 years old, spent most of her days in the yard, either riding her bike or hanging out with Cindy. At 14, Cindy was older, more adventurous, and often pushed Lorraine to do things she wouldn't normally do. Despite their age gap, they were inseparable. That afternoon, the two sat on the curb outside Lorraine's house, drinking warm lemonade. Lorraine's younger neighbor, Timothy, was playing in the yard across the street, his head popping up occasionally from behind a bush. "I swear, the heat gets worse every year," Cindy said, wiping sweat from her forehead. She was always restless, always looking for something to do. "We should go to the park later, maybe mess around by the lake." Lorraine hesitated. She liked the park, but something had been bothering her lately. She hadn't said anything to Cindy yet, but there was this man. Lorraine had seen him a few times now, walking around the neighborhood. He didn't look like anyone's dad, didn't live nearby, but he always seemed to be watching. "I don't know, Cindy," Lorraine said, her voice soft. "I've been seeing this guy around. He gives me the creeps." Cindy snorted. "What guy?" Lorraine pointed down the street, where she had seen him the last time. "I don't know who he is, but my mom said to be careful around strangers." Cindy rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "You worry too much. This is Edmond. Nothing ever happens here. He's probably just visiting family or something." "Maybe," Lorraine replied, though the unease stayed with her. She didn't want to seem paranoid, but the man wasn't a one-off thing. He'd been around enough for her to notice. Cindy, sensing Lorraine's reluctance, nudged her. "Look, if it makes you feel better, we can keep an eye out. But nothing's going to happen." Lorraine forced a smile and nodded. "Okay, but if you see him, just run home, okay?" "Fine, fine." Cindy waved it off. "Now let's head to the park later. We need to do something fun before summer's over." Lorraine smiled, but her thoughts were still on the man. She had learned to trust her instincts, and something about this summer felt off. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the two girls stood and headed toward their houses to change before their trip to the park. Lorraine glanced back down the street one last time, her heart quickening as she half expected to see the man watching from the shadows. But the street was quiet, just as it always had been. For now, the sun was beginning to dip in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Lorraine and Cindy had changed into their park clothes, ready to spend the last bit of daylight by the lake. They strolled down the street, their usual chatter filling the space between them. But Lorraine couldn't shake the feeling, that itch at the back of her mind warning her to stay alert. She glanced around, scanning the neighborhood like her mom had told her. Nothing seemed out of place. Just a few cars parked in driveways, Timothy still running around his yard, and the occasional distant bark of a dog. As they turned the corner toward the park, Lorraine saw him. Her heart dropped. He was sitting in an old beat-up sedan parked just a few houses away, his gaze fixed on them. It was the same man she had seen before. Scruffy, with greasy hair and dark eyes that seemed to follow every move they made. "Cindy," Lorraine whispered, her hand gripping her friend's arm. "That's him." Cindy looked over, her smile fading when she saw the car. The man didn't move, didn't make a sound, but the air around them suddenly felt heavier, like it was thick with something dangerous. "Let's just walk faster," Cindy said, trying to keep her voice calm. But Lorraine could tell she was nervous too. They picked up their pace, moving away from the car, their flip-flops slapping against the hot pavement. Lorraine's pulse quickened as they passed the car, her eyes darting sideways to see if the man was still watching. He was. As they moved farther down the street, the sound of the car door closing made Lorraine's blood run cold. She didn't need to look back to know he was getting out. "Cindy," Lorraine said, her voice trembling. "We need to run." Cindy looked at her, eyes wide. Without a word, they broke into a sprint, their legs pumping as fast as they could. The sound of footsteps behind them confirmed Lorraine's worst fear. The man was following. They didn't stop, didn't slow down, running past house after house, hoping someone would see them, help them. But the street was dead quiet, no one around to hear them. "Come on," Cindy shouted, pulling Lorraine toward a shortcut through the yards, but Lorraine's feet felt like lead. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her mind spinning as she tried to think to figure out how to get away. And then it happened. The car engine roared to life behind them. The man had jumped back into his car, and now it was moving toward them, faster than before. "Run, Lorraine!" Cindy screamed, but Lorraine's legs wouldn't move fast enough. The car was too close now, the sound of its tires screeching against the pavement ringing in her ears. And then, just as they reached the corner, the car sped up. Lorraine turned, just in time to see the man grab Cindy and shove her into the back seat. Cindy screamed, her voice piercing through the silent neighborhood as the car door slammed shut. Lorraine froze, helpless, as the car peeled away, the tires screeching around the corner. Cindy's cries faded as the car disappeared from sight. "No!" Lorraine screamed, her voice hoarse with desperation. She shouted for help, but the street remained empty. No one had seen, no one had heard. It was just her, standing alone, gasping for breath. But Lorraine didn't run home. She couldn't. Instead, a strange feeling gripped her. An instinct, almost like she knew where the man was going. Without another thought, she started running again, her heart pounding as she followed the path she somehow knew, heading toward a place she had never been, but now felt she had always known. Lorraine ran, her legs burning with each stride, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The image of Cindy being dragged into that car played over and over in her mind, her friend's screams still echoing in her ears. The sky had darkened, casting long shadows over the quiet streets, but Lorraine didn't care. She followed her instincts, her feet carrying her down paths she wasn't even sure she knew. Her mind raced as fast as her legs. She didn't know how, but something deep inside told her where to go. The man was heading toward the lake. Lorraine didn't question it. She just kept running, her breath coming in sharp gasps, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. The familiar neighborhood gave way to more isolated stretches of road as she neared the outskirts of town. There it was, the lake. In the dim light, she could make out the silhouette of the old boathouse near the water's edge. It was a place kids dared each other to go to at night, said to be haunted by old stories. Lorraine had never been there, but somehow she knew that's where Cindy was. She slowed down, her heart thudding painfully in her chest as she approached the boathouse. The wind from the lake stirred the tall grass, the air carrying the faint scent of algae and wet wood. The area was eerily quiet, except for the sound of her shallow breathing. The man's car was parked just outside, hidden among the trees. The sight of it sent a chill down Lorraine's spine, but she pushed her fear aside. Cindy needed her. Lorraine moved quietly, creeping toward the boathouse door. She could hear muffled sound from inside, the faint rustle of movement. Cindy was in there, and so was the man. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the door. Her heart screamed at her to turn back, to run and find help, but she couldn't leave Cindy. Not after everything. With a deep breath, Lorraine slowly pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, and the dim light cast long shadows across the wooden beams. There, in the middle of the room, was Cindy, tied to a chair, tears streaming down her face. And the man was there too, kneeling in front of her, tying thick ropes around her wrists. Lorraine's blood boiled with anger. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Stop!" she yelled, her voice echoing through the boathouse. The man froze, his hands hovering over the ropes. He turned his head slowly, confusion etched on his face. He looked around, eyes narrowing as he searched for the source of the voice. There was no one else in the boathouse. Stop it! Lorraine screamed again, her voice louder this time, shaking the walls. The man's confusion deepened. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants, his gaze darting around the empty room. His breath came out in ragged gasps, as if the air itself had grown colder. Lorraine took another step forward, her eyes locked on Cindy. The man looked right past her, unable to see her standing just feet away. Cindy whimpered, her eyes wide with terror, but she wasn't looking at the man anymore. She was staring at Lorraine, her mouth open in shock, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Lorraine didn't understand. Why wasn't the man reacting? He hadn't even acknowledged her presence. He only seemed more confused, glancing around like he couldn't find the source of the voice. Then something changed in the man's expression. His hands began to tremble. His eyes, wide and frantic, flicked toward the corner of the room where Lorraine stood. For a split second, it looked like he was going to reach for Cindy again. But then his resolve crumbled. His face went pale. Without a word, the man bolted, leaving Cindy tied to the chair. His footsteps pounded against the wooden floor as he sprinted out of the boathouse, slamming the door behind him. Lorraine stood frozen for a moment, still unsure of what had just happened. But there was no time to think. She rushed to Cindy, fumbling with the knots, her hands shaking as she worked the ropes free. Cindy was sobbing uncontrollably, her body trembling. "It's okay," Lorraine whispered, her own voice unsteady. "You're safe now." Once the ropes were off, Cindy clung to Lorraine. The two of them huddled together in the middle of the dark, abandoned boathouse. Lorraine's heart still raced, but a deep, protective instinct had taken over. They needed to get out of there. Fast. They stumbled out of the boathouse and into the night, the path ahead shrouded in darkness. But Lorraine knew they would make it. She held Cindy close as they made their way back through the trees, their footsteps the only sound in the silence of the night. By the time they reached the edge of the neighborhood, the last of the sun's light had disappeared, leaving the streets cloaked in shadow. They didn't stop running until they saw the lights of Cindy's house flickering in the distance. The front door of Cindy's house swung open just as the girls reached the steps. Cindy's mother, wide-eyed with panic, rushed out, her hands flying to her mouth when she saw her daughter. "Cindy!" she cried, pulling her into a tight embrace. Cindy sobbed into her mother's arms, her body trembling from the shock of what had happened. Lorraine stood off to the side, watching the reunion in silence, her heart pounding from the chase, the fear, and the relief that Cindy was safe. "What happened?" Cindy's mother asked, her voice shaky. "Where were you?" Cindy tried to explain, her words coming out in broken fragments between sobs. "The man, he grabbed me, took me to the lake, tied me up." Cindy's mother held her tighter, trying to soothe her, but her eyes were full of fear. Lorraine stepped closer, her voice steady as she added, "We need to tell the police. He's still out there." Cindy's mother looked up, startled. "Of course, yes. I'll call them." Her hands fumbled for the phone as she ushered Cindy inside. "Come inside, both of you." Lorraine followed them into the house, the familiar warmth of the home wrapping around her like a blanket. She had been here countless times before. Late-night sleepovers, summer afternoons spent watching TV. But something felt different now. She couldn't shake the strange sense of distance, of not fully belonging. Cindy's mother dialed the police, her voice hurried as she explained the situation. But Cindy's gaze was fixed on Lorraine, her eyes wide and confused. You saved me," Cindy whispered, her voice barely audible. Lorraine nodded, offering a small smile. "Of course I did." But Cindy's face remained pale, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. There was something in her eyes that Lorraine couldn't place. A mix of disbelief and fear. Before Lorraine could ask what was wrong, there was a knock at the door. Cindy's mother answered it quickly, and standing there was another familiar figure. Lorraine's mother. "Is everything okay?" Lorraine's mother asked, her face tight with concern. She looked past Cindy's mom, her eyes scanning the room. "Where's Lorraine?" Cindy's mother looked back, confused. "She's here. She saved Cindy." Lorraine's mother froze. Her expression shifted from concern to something else. Something darker. Her hands trembled and she glanced around the room as if searching for something. "Lorraine?" Cindy's mother repeated, turning to look at the two girls. But when her eyes landed on Cindy standing alone by the couch, her brow furrowed in confusion. She was just... Cindy's mother trailed off as she slowly turned back to Lorraine's mother. The air in the room thickened, as if some invisible weight had settled over them all. "I'm sorry," Lorraine's mother whispered, her voice cracking. Tears welled up in her eyes. "But Lorraine's gone." Cindy's mother stepped forward, shaking her head, her voice frantic. "What are you talking about? She's right here." "She just brought Cindy back. She's gone," Lorraine's mother repeated, tears streaming down her face now. "She's been gone for 5 months." The room fell into a stunned silence. Cindy stared at Lorraine's mother, unable to comprehend the words. She looked back at the spot where Lorraine had been standing just moments before, but now there was no one there. Cindy's breath caught in her throat. The realization crashed over her like ice-cold water. Lorraine hadn't just saved her. Lorraine wasn't alive. I saw her," Cindy whispered, her voice shaking. "She saved me." "I miss her too," Lorraine's mother said softly, her face crumpling with grief. "Every single day." The truth settled like a heavy weight on Cindy's shoulders. Her friend, her protector, had been a ghost all along, watching over her from the other side. Lorraine had come back to save her, to protect her from the same fate she had suffered. Tears welled in Cindy's eyes. Her heart ached, torn between the relief of being alive and the devastating truth about her friend. The room fell silent, the tension thick as Cindy tried to process what Lorraine's mother had just said. "She's been gone for 5 months," Lorraine's mother repeated softly, her voice cracking. She wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming. "That man! He took her." Cindy's heart pounded in her chest. Everything around her felt like it was spinning out of control. Lorraine, her best friend, the girl who had saved her just moments ago, was dead? "No," Cindy whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be right. She was just with me. She saved me." Cindy's mother, now pale with confusion and concern, moved closer. "Honey, what do you mean? Lorraine hasn't been around for..." "I saw her," Cindy cried, her voice trembling. "She was right there. She was the one who untied me. She helped me escape." Tears blurred her vision as she spoke, her chest tightening. "She was with me the whole time." Lorraine's mother's face twisted with grief as she watched Cindy struggle with the truth. She reached out, gently placing a hand on Cindy's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Cindy," she whispered. "I'm sorry that she wasn't really there." Cindy pulled away, her mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. She had seen Lorraine, heard her voice, felt her presence. But now, as she looked around the room, she realized that Lorraine was nowhere to be found. She was gone. Disappeared, as if she had never been there at all. Cindy's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her chest heaved with sobs. It didn't make any sense. Lorraine had been real, so real, but now, she wasn't. It hit her all at once. The pieces fell into place. Lorraine's mother wasn't lying. The man who had taken Cindy had also taken Lorraine months before. Lorraine had died, and somehow, she had come back to save Cindy from the same fate. Cindy's head spun, her thoughts swirling. She remembered how the man had seemed confused, like he couldn't see Lorraine in the boathouse, how only Cindy had looked directly at her. She remembered Lorraine's strange calmness, her certainty of where to find Cindy, the way Lorraine hadn't seemed afraid, even when the man had taken Cindy, because Lorraine wasn't alive. The truth was overwhelming, crashing over Cindy in a tidal wave of disbelief and sorrow. Lorraine had been watching over her, protecting her from beyond. Cindy's mother sat beside her, rubbing her back gently. "It's okay, Cindy. You're safe now." "That's what matters." Cindy shook her head, tears falling freely. "But Lorraine, she saved me." "I know, sweetheart," Cindy's mother whispered. "I know." The police arrived soon after. Officers spoke quietly with Cindy's mother, asking questions, taking notes. Lorraine's mother sat by herself, staring out the window with hollow eyes, lost in her own world of grief. Cindy could hear the low murmur of voices, but the words didn't register. She was numb. One of the officers, a tall man with a clipboard, crouched down in front of Cindy. "Can you tell us anything about the man?" he asked gently. Cindy looked up, her eyes red from crying. She tried to focus, to remember. The man's face flashed in her mind. Dark, scruffy, with a cold look in his eyes. But that wasn't what stuck with her. What she remembered most was the way Lorraine had stood between her and the man, her face full of determination, as if she knew exactly what to do. Cindy opened her mouth to speak, but the words got caught in her throat. How could she explain what had happened? How could she tell them that the person who had saved her wasn't even alive? The officer waited patiently, his eyes kind. Cindy swallowed hard and whispered, "I don't know where he went." Lorraine scared him away. The officer blinked, clearly confused, but he didn't press further. "Okay, thank you," he said softly, standing up. As the police continued their work, Cindy's mind wandered. She stared out the window, half expecting to see Lorraine standing in the yard, smiling like she always did. But the yard was empty. Lorraine was gone. The next day, Cindy walked past Lorraine's house on her way home. The street was quiet, the air heavy with the summer heat. She paused in front of the house, her gaze lingering on the front door. For a moment, she wished she could knock, like she always had, and see Lorraine's face light up with a smile. But there was no knock. There was no smile. Cindy's heart ached. She couldn't wrap her mind around the idea that Lorraine was really gone, that she had been gone for months. The summer felt different now, darker, lonelier. The streets, once filled with laughter and sunshine, seemed colder without her friend. And yet, there was a warmth inside her, a small flicker of comfort. Lorraine had come back. She had been there when Cindy needed her most. Even in death, Lorraine had been her protector. As Cindy turned to leave, a soft breeze rustled through the trees. She stopped, her heart skipping a beat. For a brief moment, she thought she saw someone, standing by the window of Lorraine's house. A small figure, her dark hair framing her face, watching. Cindy blinked, and the figure was gone. A smile tugged at the corner of Cindy's lips, her eyes filling with tears. Maybe Lorraine wasn't so far away after all. She whispered into the wind, "Thank you." And with that, she walked home, knowing that Lorraine would always be with her. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means the world to us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping tales and deep dives into the mysteries of folklore and the supernatural. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about the story. Feel free to share them in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the unknown.